All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at our panel about book banning. My name's Anna Bessesen. I use they, them pronouns, and I will be your moderator today. And I'm going to go ahead and let our panelists introduce themselves down the line.
My name is Bryan Young. I use he, they pronouns. I'm a writer. I work in the... I write original fiction, but I also work in franchises and IP work. So I've worked in Star Wars, Doctor Who. I write a lot in BattleTech. If my brain seems a little addled, I have written 3 books in the BattleTech franchise on contract in the last 100 days, and I finished the last one yesterday. So, so I might not even know where I am right now.
My name is Christian McKay Heidecker, he, they pronouns. I am the author of 7 books for young readers. One of them won a Newbery Honor, Scary Stories for Young Foxes, and I review children's horror for the New York Times sometimes. And I find book banning cowardly.
My name's Christina Allen. I write as C.W. Allen. I'm the president-elect of the League of Utah Writers. I'm a middle grade author, and I'm also on the board of Let Utah Read.
My name is Rachael Bush. I'm the president of the League of Utah Writers, and I write science nonfiction for children and teachers, and I also write romance for adults. And what else were we supposed to add?
That was the first question. Good job. I'm proud of you. So I'm an educator as well. I teach computer science, but I have had colleagues that have been directly impacted by book banning, which is part of why I'm here. So my first question is going to be, why did you decide to become a writer, and who do you write for? And we'll start with Rachael for this one.
I became a writer because I wanted to write romance stories that I wanted to read, which means romance stories with a lot of sex and consent. That was who I wanted to write for. So who's my audience? Adults. That's who my audience is.
So I have visual aids. I became a writer because of this book. This is The Westing Game. It's a Newbery Award winner from the 1970s. And so the author had already passed away by the time I read this. This work has just had staying power. And so when I read this book, I'll probably talk about it more throughout the panel, but because it is about a group of people that are really getting to know each other, and it's told in this omniscient point of view where we get to hear their thoughts and the way they misunderstand each other. As someone who felt misunderstood constantly as a child and I was not good at talking to people, this was just opened a world for me into other people's brains. It's also a puzzle mystery, which is just fun. And so between those two things, I said, I want to learn how to do that. So I write for middle grade readers, which are ages roughly 8 to 12 or 13.
I became a writer because I wasn't very good at anything else, and I was essentially raised by a television, so I've always had storytelling stirring in my blood. It took me a while to figure out exactly who I was writing for, other than my own inner child. But after I wrote Foxes, I started to receive letters from kids who had survived certain types of abuse, and who told me that they would read my book 4 or 5 times in a row because they had never seen an abuser like one they had experienced represented in literature. And so it was only in the last couple of years that I realized that I write for kids who are trying to escape childhood trauma.
My answer, when I knew I wanted to be a writer, is twofold and a little complicated, and I'll try to shorten it. I knew I wanted to be a writer when stories really took over my life, because I was one of those kids who went through a lot of childhood trauma. And when I was in the 5th grade, I won an award for creative writing, and it was sort of one of the very few bits of positive reinforcement I got in my life. And as I grew older, I realized that telling stories and escaping through them was a really great thing in my life. Literally hiding in a closet writing stories felt really good. And being able to tell stories felt very cathartic and really became a coping mechanism for me over the course of my life. And who I tell stories for, on one level, it's really me. But as I write stories and tell stories, I realize that the stories I tell, aside from me, I've been finding in very much that same way, is I'll get letters from people saying, like, holy crap, I've never seen anybody like me before in stories. And I realize that I write a lot about people who are like me, and I didn't realize that there were people like me out there that have gone through and experienced trauma and gone through that and have gone through that reckoning, like, as an adult. And right now I'm writing a ton of, like, military science fiction in the Battletech universe, or I'm writing a lot of horror and things like that, and people going through that. And so writing for people that want to see that experience reflected honestly is where a lot of my energy goes.
I really appreciate that everyone is really speaking to the personal experience of writing, because that's why most of us do it. Is there something really internal and core to who we are that makes us do this? So thank you for sharing that. Next question I'm going to ask is disappearing off my phone, because that's just what my phone is doing to me today. Technology, you guys, it's great until it isn't.
Agreed.
Okay. Next one I've got is going to start to steer us into the banned books category. We're going to look at some people claim that a book is not truly banned unless it is illegal to purchase, sell, or read it. In your opinion, what constitutes censorship? And we'll start with Bryan for this one.
In my opinion, censorship is I mean, like, it really depends on the context. If my world exists at my school and I'm living in a world where I might be oppressed or abused or traumatized at home, and school might be the only place that I can experience the outside world, and I'm not allowed to experience the outside world because the government is infringing upon my right to experience that there, then yeah, I'm being censored against because I'm being oppressed across all of the facets of my life. I think there are a lot of issues that there are parents who disagree with them being presented, even though there is nothing inherently wrong with them. There are parents who are flat out wrong about things, and kids, I don't know. I don't always think parents are the final arbiter of what is okay and what isn't, and that parents can be censoring things from kids. I don't always think that schools are the best arbiter for things. There were definitely fights I got into. I grew up in Utah County, and in Alpine School District, there were fights I got in with my junior high school librarians because I wanted to read Stephen King books, and they weren't there on the library shelves. Because I'd torn through everything I could find, and it was like, why can't I get this book? Well, it's not appropriate for you. Well, who are you to decide that? Now with what we have with the legislature stepping in, where they have no training on art or literature or anything like that, where they're mandating on top of all of that more things, I can't even begin to say, like, of course that's censorship. Of course they're saying, like, these are topics that you're not capable of understanding. And it's such a personal thing to decide, and I don't know. It's not okay.
I often go into schools and talk about scary stories, and kids will mention movies they've watched that honestly almost made my eyes bleed as an adult, and I'm like, oh, I really wish that you hadn't been exposed to that. So I think, we can all agree that there is some material that maybe kids are not ready for yet. But I've been lucky enough in my career to meet hundreds of teachers and librarians, and I trust them to make those decisions for their individual student body because that is what they're there for. But I don't think that these laws are about appropriateness. You know, if they were, then how many biblical stories would be banned from schools? I think it's much more about control. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that most banned books are about the experiences of marginalized people, and specifically in Utah with these 13 most recent banned books, that they are about women's experiences. So I just can only imagine the people making these decisions are just extremely boring.
Yeah, so like at the heart of the question is, you know, is it truly banned if there's still a legal way to get a hold of this book? So the first point I'd like to make is that censorship doesn't start all at once. It's these little gradual steps where it's just hard to access, where we're discouraging schools or libraries from carrying things that legislators don't favor. And once you have established the concept that on some level it's okay for the government to tell people what it's okay to read, then you've established a precedent. And it can be applied to anything. It could be if suddenly the government says, so this is the policy of the country of France, and I don't want to disparage France, but this is the take they have on it, is rather than the government can't sponsor a religion, it's religion is not welcome in public life. You're not allowed to have outward displays of religion. That is a private thing only. So if we were to get someone who is not Christian or who is not religious come into a library board and say, for example, A Wrinkle in Time is overtly Christian. This offends me. This is unacceptable. You should pull it from the shelves, even though it is decades beloved and the winner of many, many awards. So yeah, anytime you've established a precedent that it's okay for the government to say what you can or cannot read, or to even just, dipping a toe into those waters to say it's okay for the government to make it harder for you to access this information, that just leaves the doors open for taking it up another notch, and then another notch, and then another notch. So my children attend a Title I school. We're a little tiny rural community. And so for kids that live in the outside farming communities, if they don't live right in town, the school library is the only access they have to books at all. There is not a single bookstore in Millard County. That's the only place they can find books. A lot of these come from disadvantaged families, and so they don't have the money to purchase books and keep them at home. The school library is where they find them. They're not allowed to use the city library unless they live in city limits, so these kids in little farming communities don't. So literally, the school library is their only lifeline to books at all. And so if the local school board says, well, we don't want to, I went to a school board meeting. There was a fight about the Golden Compass because they said it was anti-Christian. They were offended by that. Well, who gets to say? You were offended by that, but what if an atheist parent comes in and says, nope, Wrinkle in Time offends me. We can't have either one. Now suddenly there's kids who this is absolutely written for their age group. There should be nothing overtly offensive about this, but because the adults are fighting about what makes them uncomfortable, the kids lose out.
Yeah. The censorship is a tricky thing in general because it's usually aimed at prohibiting things that are seen as obscene, which, how do you even define that? And the 13 books that were banned in August of 24 in Utah across all state school libraries, they not only are about women, but also they include sex in all of them. All of them are banned because they're like, this is sexually explicit, or there was drug use on this page, and there was also mention of masturbation. And I'm like, do you think that children are not having these experiences, honestly? Because I don't understand. I have a child who is in high school, and they have single-use bathrooms that lock, which is great because it's all gender neutral for everybody. It's great. But it also means there's privacy. And she has had experiences in the bathroom where she's gone in and there's the smell of cannabis in the bathroom because someone is smoking in there. And then also she finds used condoms in the bathroom, which I'm like, at least they're being safe. But also, if you think that children are not being exposed to whatever we're trying to protect them from in books, I don't know what kids they're thinking in this society. I don't know who they're really being protected from. And yeah, it blows my mind because I was really looking through the list and I'm like, why aren't these books banned? Why is this? Oh, it's sex. Oh, it's sex again. And also sex again, right? Like that's a human thing. It's a human experience. I don't understand why people are so afraid of it. So that's my take is always like, of course, people are afraid of women and people of color and LGBTQ people, and you put sex in there too, and it's just becomes a really hot button topic for some reason.
I think one of the books on the list, and I wrote an article about it for City Weekly, was Blankets, the graphic novel.
Love.
And
it's so beautiful.
It's terrific. You read it then?
Yeah.
And it's I think it's a step more than the sex. It's also the religious abuse and the trauma of growing up in an isolated religious community. And I think part of that is so important actually for teenagers growing up in isolated religious communities to read, to see that there can be a light at the end of that tunnel, that you can escape that there's a world beyond that, and that you can perceive some of those things to be abusive.
Yeah, well, and I read articles about Blankets as well that said it was pornographic. The illustrations were pornographic. And I'm like, do you know that people have smartphones? Do you know that children have smartphones? And they have access to actual photographs of human bodies that are naked? A line drawing that's in black and white, like, is that really on par with what you can pull up on your phone with a single Google search, really?
I mean, I don't know. I owned a comic book store in Orem when Blankets came out, and it was a really moving experience, not only as someone who had survived trauma, but had survived, having grown up in my teen years in Orem, which I would consider at the time in the early 90s an isolated religious community. Some of that feeling and that vibe and needing to escape that, Blankets hit me right between the eyes and made me feel very, very seen. And it was one of those books that really flew off the shelves, and I recommended it to people that felt like it would speak to them a lot. And I sold so many copies of that book, and people were very thankful and grateful for it. And it made them feel seen and recognized. And I would not hesitate to put that book in the hands of any teenager who is feeling those feelings of isolation. And of course, parents that are putting that abuse on teenagers are not going to want their kids to read those books. But if they find it in a school library and the librarian sees that abuse happening and puts that book in their hands, that's what we want school libraries for. And it's the same thing with LGBT kids, right? Over the last few years across the country, not just in Utah, we're seeing so many of those books geared toward young adults and middle grade kids. It's not like we're seeing, well, they are banning board books, or
early readers.
Early readers.
Yeah,
What's the children's book about the penguins?
Untangled
Makes three.
Where it's there's LGBT couples and we're exposing children to this, where they're banning these books where it's just this is sexually explicit because queer people exist. Where
Wait, we do?
Yeah, I know, right? I know,
fake.
right? I know,
Sounds
right? Where these kids can benefit from just seeing themselves existing, right? Because they don't at home. And it's so important for them to see themselves just existing as humans in society, because they might not at home, or they might be vilified at home because of the horrible things they might hear in society or at home or in their church or wherever. And these libraries and these books might be the only safe haven that they can get, and the idea that the legislature is trying to take these things away from them is horrifying.
I promise I'm not going to transform this into a Blankets fan panel.
No, go for it. Go for
But I was 19 when that came out, and I was attending Utah State up in Logan, and I rolled down to the Borders, and I honestly had not realized that there were comics out there that were not tights and fights. You know, I mean, like, when you grow up in a realm of Alan Moore and Frank Miller and things, see the Marvel movies, you can think that that's explicitly what comics are. But I read it sitting in that Borders and wept openly because I was so moved by it. And that opened the doors to Fun Home, talking about a queer story. If anybody hasn't read Fun Home, you've got to. Or Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. And it is interesting to think about bringing, so-called graphic images. I actually have a problem with the term graphic novel because parents have been sort of, they've gotten used to keeping their kids away from things that are graphic. And then I wouldn't consider Blankets, Fun Home, or Persepolis a novel. They are memoirs, along with Mouse. And so there was a huge portion of the world that blew wide open for me because I had these illustrative examples of real people living their lives. And those are the ones that I recommend to anyone who believes that comics are all spandex and capes.
Yeah.
And they're getting mouse banned.
Of course they are.
We've been talking a lot about children's literature because the Utah legislature, has started with school libraries, which again is a stepping stone to moving on to other kinds of censorship. They're going for a soft target here. But so when I teach classes to writers about, they're used to the idea of writing for adults and they want to know what's different about writing for children. Maybe they thought, I've always wanted to do a picture book or something. I teach a class about what's different about writing for children and how to get into that. And the number one myth that I have to dispel, and sometimes after the class people still don't believe me, is that they think the point of children's literature is that there's something wrong with the kids these days and I'm going to fix them. That the whole point of writing a book for children is that I get to give them a lecture. Kids are the most discerning readers in the world. They can smell a lecture a mile away and they don't like them any more than you do. They will drop a book immediately if it tells them what to do. The point of children's literature is to make children feel seen and heard and understood, to reinforce things that they already know deep down to be true, to be a mirror to their experience, or to open windows to other experiences, to get to put on somebody else's shoes and walk in them for a mile. And so when people think if a child reads this book or sees this picture or whatever, they're going to instantly believe whatever it's telling them, and I don't agree with that. That takes such a dim view of children as human beings. They can think, they can reason, they already have opinions. They're not just going to be little sponges that absorb whatever you put in front of them. And the people who attempt to steer children's minds by putting only certain things in front of them find really quickly that those kids are no longer receptive to those messages.
Well, and as an educator, I'm going to speak as an educator for just a second. I have a young man in one of my class periods who he and I have very differing opinions on many different things. And he kind of kept poking me, being like, I want your feedback. I want to know what you think about this. And I looked at him and I said, we're not ever going to agree, and that's okay. So here's how you're going to behave in the class to respect both of our humanities and how we view the world. And that's how we're going to make this work. And he looked very surprised that this was a thing that could happen, that I wasn't going to berate him or get angry with him. They know what they believe, and they're going to believe it and push back if you try and put something else in front of them. We've drifted from the question a little bit, so I'm going to try and reel us back in. I'm actually going to go off book, so please forgive me. Christian brought up something really important, that you picked up Blankets in a Borders, in a bookstore. I know someone that owns a bookstore that is queer who refuses to stock the Harry Potter books. Does that count as censorship, and why or why not?
Fantastic question. Where do you want us to start, Anna?
Wherever you want to. Whoever's got it. It's off book, so
I have a thought about it.
Please.
So, I'd like to go back to this example. No, this one, Westingame. So this book was written in the 1970s. It was revolutionary for its time in that it was putting people of different races and economic classes together and contrasting their experiences and talking about what was hard and about ways that they understood or misunderstood each other. However, it uses terms for intellectually disabled people that we would absolutely not use today. Like, frankly, the way it displays Asian women is kind of offensive. Like, it was trying, but today we would have done it better. But, it's decades old. But this is still a beautiful book to me. And so when I read it to and with my children, we have a conversation about, like, okay, here's this word. You've probably never heard it before because we don't use it anymore. Here's what it means. Here's why we don't use it anymore. It would be a tragedy for people to lose out on this book simply because it doesn't meet current standards of what is acceptable. So sometimes books that get frequently banned fit this mold, where it's like, we're not going to read To Kill a Mockingbird anymore because it has racially offensive language in it. Well, let's have a conversation about that language and why it's offensive, because I guarantee you they've heard that word on the internet. We can't just erase things. We need to talk about why and let readers form their own opinions. So, to the point about Harry Potter, it is a bookstore owner's right and responsibility, frankly, to stock the things that they think their customers want and that they think are culturally relevant. It would be irresponsible for somebody who had some kind of authority, a government literature panel or something, to say nobody can read this book because of whatever issue. I think that's as the League of Utah Writers, we invite guest speakers to our conferences. Sometimes that's something we consider, is not just is their work popular, but as a person, is this somebody that we want to put our name behind? That's a curation decision. And librarians do all kinds of curation, deciding what is relevant for their audience, what they are likely to want, because they have limited money to spend on which titles they're going to procure. They have to make a decision. Decisions are going to be made, that's fine. But ultimately, it's the readers who need to be making that decision. So nobody is required to platform anything, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make things available to those who want it, even if it's an opinion we disagree with.
Whenever I speak at schools, in respect for any trans students who might be listening, I always refer to that author as she who must not be named. And it would be really strange if all of a sudden I had to use her name, I agree that because this person owns their bookshop, that they get to decide what goes in there. And I think Harry Potter is a really interesting example because it is a cash cow. So that is a business decision that's not getting them extra sales, as opposed to so many of the other books that we've talked about that honestly haven't sold a millionth as many as any one volume in Harry Potter, and so for banning so many of these other books, it feels more like suppression and censorship. But there's also that idea where, we have to be a little totalitarian about totalitarianism. That if there is somebody who is outspoken about harming a portion of our population, then we kind of have the duty to suppress that to protect other folks. So I would support them. I think it would be a different conversation if they were literally the only bookstore in town, or as Christina said, had the power with like 2 other bookstores to make the decision of every bookstore in the state. But with those facts on the table, I think that's their business decision, and I'd support it.
Yeah, well, and that is a tactic that book banners are trying, is to pressure bookstores not to carry certain books, or to pressure publishers not to publish certain books. And that's a really interesting and nuanced conversation, because when, say, a politician who has said something that I find offensive gets a memoir deal, am I going to purchase that book? No. Am I going to be really happy with the publisher for having chosen to platform them? Not especially. But should that mean it's illegal to sell that book? I don't think so. And the way, like, we can use their words as evidence. If somebody that I find offensive wants to write a book and say offensive things, then we have those offensive things they said right there in print. We can say, look, they can't pretend they didn't say this. It's here. They wrote it. So, like, the fact that a book exists doesn't mean that you endorse it. It's a record, frankly.
Yeah, I really feel strongly that everyone has the right to write down what they feel and how they want to, and anybody who wants to has the right to publish that, and anyone who wants to has the right to sell it or put it in their library, but no government entity has the right to say, you must put this in your store or your library, or you must not put this in your store or your library. And no one has the right to tell any organization, you must platform this person or you must not platform this person. I think that those are decisions for the people doing the curating, right? Like, as the League of Utah Writers, we've had tons of these discussions about, like, who would we want to see appearing at our conferences, and we want to see people representative of our community and people who are not marginalizing folks, right? Like, we get requests for certain authors all the time that I don't think we'd ever extend an invitation to because of their outspoken bigotry.
Yeah.
Right?
But we're also not going on the internet and saying anybody who does platform these people is scum and we should boycott them all.
I might
we're
be
just making
thinking that.
Perhaps. But we're making personal curation decisions. We are not affecting the decisions of others.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that those decisions are personal, in that a bookstore owner, especially a queer bookstore owner, not selling Harry Potter, I applaud that decision, actually, because she who must not be named has really, she's not just outspoken about it, she's actively giving money and influence to harm people, and has removed herself from the social contract, and therefore I don't think the social contract applies to her anymore.
Which is really ironic, because her work used to be banned. So I lived in Houston as a child. It was the Bible Belt. A lot of parents wouldn't let their kids read her work because it was supposedly satanic. So it's interesting that it's come full circle.
If I owned a comic book store right now, I would have a really hard time putting Frank Miller and Neil Gaiman books on the shelf.
Yeah.
Honestly, I would strongly consider not having them.
Yeah. No, after what happened with Neil Gaiman, I wouldn't be putting Neil Gaiman on the shelf.
Yeah.
Which hurts, because I really enjoyed his work.
Yeah, it was painful. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was a Harry Potter fan. It hurts when I'm like, oh, you're coming from my family. That's, wow, don't do that.
Yeah.
Rachel, do you have any thoughts?
No,
Perfect.
Everybody.
Thank you for letting me go off book. That just hit me, and I'm like, we gotta have a conversation about that. We are at 11:45. Will you guys remind me, are we going until noon or until 12:30? What do
we have the room till 1. It's whatever people want to do.
Okay. Will you guys tell me?
Why don't we go till 12:15?
Perfect. I love it. I love a good compromise. I love that. Okay. So with that in my head, let's do this. And you guys have alluded to a lot of this as you've been talking about readers' rights to choose their own reading, that they get to choose what they want to pick up and what they want to engage with. What are your rights as the author in this situation? What rights does the author have in engaging with their readers and engaging with the legislature and engaging with all of these challenges?
I mean, writing is the most enduring form of speech. And so that just gets right to the heart of what is free speech. It's the ability to write down and share what I'm thinking. So if somebody were to, whether this is a government mechanism or whether it's a special interest group putting pressure on publishers or bookstores, if somebody was to say the thing they want to talk about is unwelcome and you should make them unwelcome, that's stifling my speech. And that's un-American.
I feel like there's a difference between what my right as a writer is and what my responsibility as a writer is. and that I can write. It's my right to write whatever I damn well please, but I also feel like it's my responsibility as a writer to do no harm, right? It's my responsibility as a writer to do my best to not write things that are harmful to my society, to write things that even I can write about the most horrible things, but I have to do it in a way that is going to tell a story that's ultimately going to help illuminate something in some way, or to help people identify with something in some way, or help people understand or come to terms with something in some way, to say something important in some way, to not use shock value or horrible things for the sake of it being horrible, and that I need to wield that responsibly. So I think that there's a difference between my right to write anything and my responsibility of what I write.
Yeah. There's a quote from Star Wars about we don't win by killing. You can probably quote it. I'm going to get it wrong. But we don't win by willing. We don't win by killing what we hate. We win by.
That's how we win, Finn. By fighting what we not by fighting what we hate. By saving what we love.
Yeah. And so the books that are enduring, that like these are my actual childhood copies of these books that I love. People don't love things that they read because it hates the same people they hate, or because it dunks on somebody that has the opposite political view or something. Them. They love books and they stay with them when it speaks to truth in them. And so sometimes people do write things for shock value or for political points or because they know it'll sell or for controversy, but those books don't stay around. They might sell in the beginning, but they're not the things that stay in libraries for decades and people have feelings about.
No, that sums it up.
I think, my rights as an author are to be able to write stories and then the audience gets to decide what to do with it from there, pretty much. But I'm not terribly concerned about my rights, considering I look like this and I have an award, But I do think that even if someone is making a sound decision about a book that, maybe shouldn't be picked up by kids just yet, that someone once said that the law is not a scalpel, it's a hammer. And I think that once you flag particular material that they find uncomfortable, then that kind of becomes open season for more nuanced material that treats those sensitive topics in ways that could actually save a kid's life. And so I think at that point, you are damaging the free speech of many, many authors, and like I said, removing materials that could be life-saving, like Speak by Laurie Hill Sanderson, for example.
I think that's what we're seeing so much of, is they're couching the book banning in it's just sexually explicit material and it's titillating and it's not good for kids, but they're taking all the context out of it, where they're not saying, oh, it's a kid who is undergoing a very ugly sexual assault, and that's this one sliver of the book, and the book is actually about the kid going through it and coming through the other side and going through the trauma and illustrating to a reader how they might survive that. Yeah. Which is actually instructive to a kid who might have undergone that, who might not have undergone that, but might experience that in the future, especially in the society we live in, where so many kids unfortunately do undergo that they might have an instruction manual, unfortunately, to survive that through these books, that we're taking them away from them, these tools that they might need to deal with that and cope with that. And they're hitting it with the hammer instead of the scalpel, because they're just saying like, oh, this is Playboy magazine times 10, instead of actually looking at the context of these books.
Well, and books are about empathy, you know? Even if we were to say best case scenario, okay, your kid never has this experience, now they have the context to empathize with someone who has had that experience.
Yeah, because a lot of my favorite books that I've read that are banned provide me with experiences that I haven't had personally, that help me have empathy for my kids who have these experiences and for other people who have these experiences. Yeah.
And again, I feel like we keep coming back to this place of connection and empathy and how we interact with other humans, and I think that's beautiful and just so important. Has anybody's work had their work censored or challenged or anything like that?
I've been getting a lot of over the last 6 months. I've had a lot of very, very vile YouTube videos made about me. Based on my BattleTech work. There's a I don't know if anybody knows this, but like military sci-fi is actually a very conservative genre, and I've been very well encouraged to do the thing I do and include people in the stuff I write, and I have folks of various races and genders and colors, and I have trans characters, and so I've got a very loud contingent of folks that have been calling for my removal from the universe because they believe that I am ruining it by including queer folks in a universe that is set 1,000 years in the future, and that clearly I'm a child abuser because I have a trans kid, and that I'm a horrible person.
You're not.
Yeah, well.
And that leads into the second half of the question is, does that affect the way you write?
It makes me kind of want to lean into it more.
Okay.
And it makes me want to lean into it more because the louder they get, the more I know I'm doing the right thing. And actually, the people who run the company and the editorial, actually, I got a really wonderful note from the creative director of the company. This is the 40th anniversary of BattleTech and MechWarrior, and he's been going on this massive global tour to go like just play the games with fans. And he's been to every continent, and he was in Australia last month, over the last month. And he said that he's been to something like 300 stores, like game stores across the world, and like he's shaken hands with like 10,000 people over the world. And he said that every store he's been to, every stop he's been to, there's been a trans fan who's come up and shaken his hand and thanked him for the work that I've been doing, making inclusion important in the universe, and that he wanted to thank me for all of the love that he's received on his tour in making the universe more diverse, and that minority of people who are being very loud about trying to get me kicked out is just that. It's a very loud minority, and that I should just keep doing what I'm doing. And it felt really good to have that validated, especially in the midst of having all of these sort of attacks and YouTube grifters coming after me.
So I want to kind of tee this question up for Christian. So in preparation for this panel, I looked up the American Library Association's list of the most commonly banned books, and they have them by decade. And so I wanted to see if the books that were banned in the 90s, like what was the same or different about them versus the kind of books that are getting banned today. And one of the number one banned books was Scary Stories by Alvin Schwartz. And I assume that's simply because it's horror, and that people assumed children shouldn't be reading horror. As someone who writes horror for children, has that affected your work?
I actually didn't know that Schwartz's stuff was banned, and I'm guessing they took one look at the illustrations. I don't know if anybody's read those stories lately. They're not very scary at all. So I, to my knowledge, I have not had anything of mine banned, and I think that I found this strange exception space where, because I took very real, very horrifying things that can happen to kids and disguised them as a nature documentary, that everybody was like, oh, it's foxes, it's fine, you know? And so I think I was surprised as anybody to receive those letters. And just like you said, that did cause me to, well, in a different way, it caused me to dig down deeper. And my newest work, I honestly think of as the Alice in Wonderland of escaping childhood trauma. And there have been moments working on it where I have genuinely broken down and had to flee my computer just to get away from some of the truths that were bubbling up inside of me, and to ask myself, you know, what's my responsibility with this? Like, where do I draw the line? What do kids need? But I think that in a society where we do have the amount of repression that we do in our valley, that unfortunately causes much more abuse, both physical and sexual. Not to mention the fact that our kids are going through frequent live shooter drills after they hear that, you know, their peers have been killed in their classrooms. And that really makes me weigh the scariness of my stories in a different way.
What today's kids are going to find scary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I never want to be gratuitous, like you said, for gratuity's sake. There always needs to be a way through it. I have to know that there is truth in the experiences that are happening on the page, and that I am showing them, because I know that there are kids out there like myself, like people on this panel, who have gone through pretty horrific experiences. And if I don't see an example of that on the shelf for a kid that age, then damn it, I want to be the one who creates it, because, you know, children's literature genuinely saved my life on more than one occasion.
It's interesting. I was having this experience with my kids where I was trying to compare the level of horror that I was consuming when I was a kid at their age. And, you know, like, I've got my 9-year-old who you might have seen running around. And he asked me, like, can we watch scary movies for Halloween? And I was trying to look for some, and I'm like, let's watch Jaws, let's watch Alien. And he's like, way too scary for me. And I was like, when I was your age, I was watching all this stuff. And I had to step back and realize, like, when I was your age, I was going through so much abuse and trauma. This was catharsis. This was an escape. It was a way to allow me to experience that fear and trauma, to get away from the trauma I was experiencing in real life. And you don't have any of that. And that that level is different for kids. That's why I was going into my junior high going, like, give me the next Stephen King book. Like, give me this stuff. And they're like, that's not appropriate for you. And it's like, you don't know what's appropriate for me. I need this escape. And I came to that realization. It was, like, really odd, where it's like, some kids are prepared for that, some kids aren't. And it's so difficult to know. And that's why I really like kind of getting back to the idea that the librarians do, because they do know these kids, and they do see what these kids are checking out and what they are prepared for. And some of them are prepared for this stuff. Some of them need it, right? And some of them don't. And it is so individualized that watching the legislature just, take this 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 brush and paint everything with it is so disturbing.
I have kind of a long answer to this question, and I want to make sure Rachel gets a chance to talk. So I will defer if you have anything to say.
I completely forgot what the question was.
Has your work been censored or banned? Does it affect how you write in any way? The fear of censorship?
I have the fear of censorship. I have the fear of my work being called pornography because it includes consensual sex between adults. Why am I don't know why I need to be worried about that, but like all of the Sarah J. Maas books that are on that banned book for Utah specifically, I've read most of them. And if your kid wants to read 55 chapters to get to a few pages of sex, good job reading those 5,000 pages that you just read. Like you have to get so far into the stories. Yeah. So that's the thing.
Well, so you do use a pen name for romance and a different name for your nonfiction for children.
Right, because
what went into that decision?
Thank you. I was working in a couple of elementary schools, and I didn't want any of the parents, specifically the parents, to find out that I am what I write, because it is viewed very harshly here, and it makes me feel bad. I'm like, I'm not writing anything that's like bad. It's just relationships, and there's a lot of love, and it's tender and squishy too, but also sex, yeah. But I mean, we're all here because of sex. I don't understand.
I've heard that rumor.
Yeah, it's true. Your parents,
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Sorry to break it to you. But yeah, I had to be very careful with my I had to have two separate personas for that very specific reason, because I didn't want it to come back to me, and it actually did, because of social media and, here's a friend of someone you might know, those recommendations through social media. One of the office managers at one of the schools I worked in legit cornered me, where I could not escape her, and she was like, I found out what you write. Isn't it interesting? All this time, I thought you were a good person, and I was like, okay, I'm still a good person, and wow, can we be done with this conversation? There are children playing on the playground. This is not the right place for this. I'm like, this is inappropriate. You have just made it inappropriate. This is not the place for this conversation. And she did not back down. I like distraught. I'm like, what's that over there? And I like snuck away because she would not let me go. And it was like I had a moment where I was like, okay, maybe I just need to avoid her for a while. And I had to, because I felt nervous that I was going to lose my job.
And threatened.
Because I felt threatened, because she had the power to do that. She had the power to influence the director of the school. And I was like, please don't tell anyone. This is not relevant to my ability to teach plants to your kids, okay? It's not relevant. Just let me write what I write. It's fine. Yeah.
Plants have sex too.
They do, a lot, frequently. And so much so that their pollen gets all over us and in our faces, makes me sneeze.
Bees get involved sometimes, I've heard.
They have extra parties helping, carrying things back and forth. It's really weird. Plants are weird.
Okay, so my most recent book was a series conclusion. So I'd written this portal fantasy series. I can't think of anything that was particularly controversial about it. And I had to write up the finale, and I was on a deadline. And I didn't have much more than an outline for this book, which already had a publication date. So I had to get this finished up. And so because it's a portal fantasy, which means there's a secondary world, but it kind of has a connection to our world, I needed to kind of tie up all the loose ends and say, what is that connection? And I knew it had something to do with the Library of Alexandria, the ancient one, right? So I started doing some research on that, just so I could get it wasn't going to be anything extensive, just wanted to get some dates right. And I said, okay, I know this library burned down. What year? What century even would be cool? Just make sure I'm in the ballpark. Turns out the Library of Alexandria didn't actually burn down. There was a fire, but the damage was minimal. We have records that it continued for centuries after this. What actually happened was that control of the city of Alexandria, Egypt, changed hands multiple times. And every time a new leader got in charge with new priorities, they started saying, hey, this library that has a copy of every book in the world, we're not cool with every book in the world. We're going to start getting rid of some. And all these scholars that come from all over the world to study at our library, maybe we're not cool with all of them anymore. Just the ones that prioritize the things that make us look good. And so as each time the library changed hands, whether that was to Greeks, to Romans, to Christians, to Muslims, to pagans, there are many, many different groups that were in charge over the centuries. Each time, this collection that used to be, the pride and joy of it was that it was so extensive, started to just shrink because the leaders said, nope, this book's not welcome anymore, burn it. This book's not welcome anymore, burn it. And so it just kind of dwindled into obscurity. There was no single catastrophic event that destroyed it. It was people burning books on purpose instead of a natural disaster burning it on accident.
Because it didn't align.
Exactly,
with their
because it
beliefs.
didn't align with, like, we're a Christian regime and a Muslim wrote this, not welcome. There was actually a famous female mathematician that was one of the scholars at the library that was murdered by a mob because she didn't teach Christian-centered things. That and like having a woman tell a man anything was suddenly unacceptable when previously it had been okay. So I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. This is what the book wants to be about. And so as I was tying Earth's history to my fantasy world's history and lining it all up, I realized, okay, if I was moving people from the real world to this fantasy world through our little magic portal, and I didn't want people to know where they had come from, because then they might say, hey, can we take trips back to this other world that we have a magic portal to? You're going to have to ban the study of history. Otherwise, they're going to want to know. You're going to have to sequester books, because if they're written in other languages, language from where? Where'd this come from? If it references great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa getting on a ship and coming here, coming from where? And so my entire third book is about a country that has censored its own history because the information in it was inconvenient. And it came from a place of wanting to protect people, but ultimately trashed people's rights in an effort to do that. And so my main character for the book, their family kind of gets in charge of things, has inherited this whole system and goes, whoa, I just realized what they did. We got to undo this. How are we going to do this? But then has a very personal experience where their parent is saying, hey, this history book that's super banned and you're not allowed to read it and we're trying to unban it, you're not actually allowed to read this yet. There's super violent stuff in it about our family that I, as a parent, don't think you are ready to read yet. So it's not, this book is illegal for everyone. It's you, as my child who I'm responsible for, are not ready yet. And I just thought that was such an interesting balance between, this hardcore saying, no, censorship is always bad, and what are a parent's rights and responsibilities. I'm a parent, and I have children that have very different personalities and reading needs, where I can say, oh, okay, my daughter would love this. My son needs a few extra years. He's not ready for this yet. That is my responsibility for my children as a parent. It is not my responsibility to say, because my son is not ready for this, it's a bad book and nobody's kids should be reading it. So that became very personal. Books take several years to write. And so I wasn't really thinking about censorship much at the time this happened. It was just kind of, oh, isn't this interesting thing from history? By the time it got ready to publish was right when the Utah legislature was banning books in schools. And I'm like, okay, cool. Suddenly this is super relevant. I'm not somebody who loves the spotlight and controversy. Could this come back to bite me? It was too late to do anything about it, and I felt that I was on the right side of the issue, and I didn't want to do anything about it, but I worried that I was going to start getting angry letters and getting parents, labeling me as an unsafe person to write for children. I worried that it could tank my entire career by publishing that book. Thankfully, it hasn't so far, but it was a concern.
I'm going to start saying that the Library of Alexandria was banned to the ground.
I love that.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Because I didn't know that.
That's awesome.
Really brilliant and makes sense.
There is a fantastic TED talk about it. It's like an animated video. I did do other deeper kinds of research, but there is just one video that really kind of sums it all up, and that's from TED Ed. So if you look up TED Ed, What Happened to the Library of Alexandria, great resource.
I really love that fast author fear. I did other research other than a TED Talk.
I didn't just watch a TED Talk.
I did
was more.
It wasn't only YouTube.
See my citations below.
Well, and I really appreciate that, like, there was a small fire that did some damage, but because that's where we're at right now, because schools that have these books, these banned books in their library, they're not allowed to sell them, they're not allowed to donate them, they're not allowed to redistribute them. They have to be destroyed. And that just terrifies me. So
yeah, and so when the legislature is trying to say, oh, this is about protecting children, don't call us book burners. Well, okay, you literally said that these were too unsafe to be in a dumpster or a free giveaway pile. So what are you saying?
Yep.
Wow.
Okay, last question. It's going to be a speed round. Favorite banned book, and then one sentence about why you love it.
There's too many.
Pick one.
The first one, I was in a banned book club in high school, and it was the first one I read of Kurt Vonnegut's. It was Slaughterhouse-Five. And one of the reasons I love it so much is that really, if you go back and read it through the lens of trauma, it's not a science fiction book. Billy Pilgrim is unstuck in time because he's experiencing traumatic flashbacks.
Agreed so much. I'm going to say Beloved by Toni Morrison because it's just the most visceral experience of slavery that got me anywhere close to understanding it. And I'm sorry, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, because I honestly would prefer to see it in a classroom over To Kill a Mockingbird,
Amen.
which was written by a white lady 60 years ago before Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech.
So indulge me, I have 3. Favorite book of all time. I've talked about why I love it and why some people might find it controversial. However, I couldn't find any evidence that it has been extensively banned. The Giver is banned because it's the story of a supposed utopia that the longer you read, you find out this is actually a dystopia, because out of a desire to protect people, they have removed everything that makes life beautiful. And this has been extensively challenged and banned. And you can see why people that want to dictate how everybody thinks and feels might not feel cool about having that called out. The Wrinkle in Time. It's interesting for why it's been banned, both because it's overtly Christian and because Christians don't think it's doing Christianity correctly. And what I love about this has had a really deep impact on my work, is that there are these interdimensional magic beings that come to Earth to try to fix things, and they decide to take the form of elderly women. And I write about the connection between senior citizens and tweens in nearly all of my work, and I was finding this connection organically that I'm like, why do I keep wanting to write about this topic? And I think it's because there is something so freeing and beautiful about aging that these women could say, what form on this planet is going to be the most ignored, the most benign, able to do whatever I want without scrutiny? And they decided that elderly women got a pass. They could do whatever they wanted and nobody would blink. And I love that.
My favorite is And Tango Makes Three. Like, I know it's a picture book, but I read it with my kids when they were little. I mean, they're all grown and teenagers now, but we read it sometimes daily, sometimes twice during book time at bedtime. We read it so much that I had it memorized, and I just love it because it is a story of love. I'm a sucker for love. So that's what it is. And penguins are cute.
Penguins are adorable.
Yep.
All right, that brings us to time. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, panelists, for your wonderful thoughts and responses. Thank you so much.
It was an honor
Thank
sitting
you,
up
Anna.
here with you,
Of course.
honestly.